Alright guys, we are finally here. We're just about a week away from the official Steam Deck release, and as I go through some of the different discords and different online communities, there's still a bunch of questions out in the air, like will my games play on the Steam Deck, or just how well will my game play? Now, I've been trying to answer this question for the past 6 months, but a lot of you guys in the community have put my claims under some strict scrutiny. So today, we're putting it all on the table. Is my Hackendeck as fast as the Steam Deck? Let's find out. Hey guys, Turk here, hope you're having a good one. Now this video has been cooking in the oven for quite some time, and we have finally made it to my Super Bowl. Now we've been doing all sorts of different types of experiments here on the channel, talking about the Steam Deck's hardware, software solutions, and trying to get a good feel for the type of performance we should get. But a lot of you guys have some serious doubts of what my Hackendeck can do. For the uninitiated, a Hackendeck is a term given by Valve themselves for a computer system that's supposed to simulate the sort of Steam Deck performance in order to equip game developers and software developers a platform to do their work even if they're not able to get their hands on a development kit. Now, as a professional hardware developer myself, I took this spec and kind of morphed it a little bit in order to kind of take into account some of the performance differences that we should expect from the Hackendeck that Valve claims and the actual Steam Deck hardware. Now, if you want to jump straight to the results, here's the time code down below. We get straight into the gameplay, but I think you guys should listen in for just a little bit longer, because the story of this Hackendeck in particular, it kind of shows the process that we came to in order to get to this spot for both the Hackendeck as well as my channel. So guys, sit back, grab a drink, and let's start off with July 2021. Going back to the good old days of July 2021, Valve officially announced their Steam Deck and they put out their technical specifications where they listed the CPU and the GPU clock speeds as well as the memory interface and all of the other speeds and feeds that we love to see as gamers. Now, in my first video, we dissected each of these different specs, like the core speed, the core count, as well as the memory interface, in order to see how each of these different variables impacted the Steam Deck's performance. And at the end of that video, I went ahead and made kind of an optimistic guess of what I think the Steam Deck would be able to play with, and I gave some pretty promising results. At medium detail settings, GTA 5 would hit right at around 73 FPS, Horizon Zero Dawn was at 48, Shadow the Tomb Raider at 46, and Control was going to hit 36 FPS. And we went ahead and started talking about some of the other features like FSR or Fidelity FX Super Resolution, because with this lower wattage processor, we definitely are going to need as much help as we can get in order to boost our frame rates. A few weeks later, Valve finally let some of the press get some hands-on time with the Steam Deck, and fortunately for us, Linus Tech Tips was able to play some Doom Eternal on the deck with that little performance counter going up in the top right, and we got our first glimpse of what the Steam Deck was going to be capable to do. Now, as the hype started to grow from this particular video, I went back to the drawing board and I compared my setup to see just how well it performed. When I put these two videos side by side, it turns out my Hackendeck was a bit faster. I think Linus Tech Tips was reporting 58 FPS and I was getting right at 63. So I decided to turn down my graphics clock rate just a smidge in order to match his results, and to be honest guys, I thought the performance was pretty good. And towards the end of that video, I claimed that Red Dead Redemption 2 would hit 40 FPS, The Witcher 3 would get around 50 FPS, and we started setting the stage for future content like talking about emulation and the different upscaling technologies that are enabled by GameScope. Then things started to get really spicy. In October, we got our first glimpse at some pretty decent performance leaks. Now, several developers started getting access to their dev kits, and a couple of Chinese news outlets somehow got their hands on the deck. And if you go back and watch those videos, I was pretty skeptical at the overall results, but what got me more intriguing is then within a few days of those posts going online, they were scrubbed due to violating some of the developer agreements going on between the developer as well as Valve. So I thought that was some pretty fishy action that meant that they were onto something. So I went and took my Hackendeck as it stood and I tested it against all of the leaks. And sure enough, my Hackendeck lined up with 7 of the 9 performance leaks. Now, the other 2 were kind of weird. They were claiming that Dota 2 would only get about 45 FPS, which, I mean, that game can run on a potato, right? So I didn't think too much of it. And then with the Cyberpunk results, they were claiming anywhere between 20 and 30 FPS, but they were mentioning a lot of stutters. So I didn't exactly fit that. I definitely felt the stutters, but at that time, I thought I was still on a pretty good track. But let's keep in mind, guys, those leaks were from back in October, and from that point, it's been relatively silent when it comes to the performance metrics that we should have been seeing from the deck. Now, as time went on and hype just continued to build, I started noticing over at the subreddit that there were a lot of pretty bold claims that the Steam Deck was going to be just as fast as a GTX 1050. And I didn't really believe it, so I went ahead and picked up a GTX 1050 off of eBay and started to do a little bit of digging. And after I was done with my experiments, I went ahead and posted my GTX 1050 versus Steam Deck video, and a lot of you guys were very critical, but the main goal with that video was to help temper the expectations and the performance predictions of what the Steam Deck was going to be able to do. Now, I tested both of these setups in Linux as well as in Windows in order to get an equal footing, and what I claimed was that the GTX 1050 was going to be at least 33% faster than the Steam Deck. I also claimed in that video that even if the Steam Deck was even 10% faster than what I posted due to driver improvements, kernel improvements, or any kind of secret sauce that Valve just hasn't released just yet, the GTX 1050 was still going to be at least 22% faster than the Steam Deck. And you guys were super critical of that video, but those were some bold claims, and I was hoping to just manage expectations just a little bit better. And to this day, this version of my Hackendeck has been used to help promote and explain some of the different software features of the deck, like running in docked mode. What does game scope look like, and how does it actually impact frame rates? And let's not forget FSR, Fidelity FX Super Resolution, being built into the operating system itself. So this Steam Deck has gone a long way, and it has helped to show you guys the performance we should see with the deck. So going into today's video, I posted a poll over in the community tab wondering how fast or how slow y'all guys thought my Hackendeck was going to be compared to the Steam Deck. And it sounds like over a third of the community thinks that my Hackendeck is going to be 10% or more slower than the Steam Deck. So with all my cards on the table and putting it all on the line, let's talk about the setup. Now, if you haven't had a chance to look at my Hackendeck build video, I'll post a link up at the top right, but the long and short of it is I am rocking the Ryzen 7 5700G APU. I am cutting off half of its cores in order to match the Steam Deck, and I'm actually clocking the CPU to 3.2 GHz, thanks to Fox's latest Forza Horizon 5 video, where he was showing anywhere between 2.8 and 3.2 GHz. Now, for the GPU, I am going to be downclocking it down to 1600 MHz to hopefully account for some of the performance per watt claims going from Vega all the way to RDNA 2. And as we said in my hardware video at the very beginning of the series, I know I'm nowhere close to the LPDDR5 5500 that's going to be on the deck, but I am rocking a spicy DDR4 4400. Besides my hardware configuration, I also wanted to test a couple of different graphics cards in this video. Now, of course, I have to bring the GTX 1050 back up because a lot of you guys think I'm still off my rocker in that comparison, so I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. But there's also been some talk over at the subreddit about an AMD-based card, the RX 560. Now, it is supposed to be slower than the GTX 1050, but there's still some questions in the air of if it's going to be as fast as the Steam Deck, slower than the Steam Deck. So I picked one up off of eBay, and we're going to be throwing it through the ringer as well. As of February 5th, there have only been 3 different media outlets that have been able to provide the community with some performance metrics on a small subset of games, and I'm going to be leveraging each of them in different aspects of the video. Now, the Fox's videos have been an incredible resource because he posts both live gameplay as well as the frame counts up in the top left of his screen. That way, I'm going to be able to replicate scene by scene, almost frame by frame for each of the games that's tested today. But it's unfortunate that he doesn't provide, minimums, maximums, averages, and 1% lows in his data, so I'm going to try and extract that from his gameplay footage to the best I can. Also, the Fox and I are over at the Steam Deck Discord. I've got a link down below, so if you're wanting to join in the conversation and help hype up the Steam Deck as we go into the launch, click the link, join the Discord. It's going to be a whole bunch of fun. Next up is Linus Tech Tips, and of course, he is super pumped about the Steam Deck, but his data is really kind of hit or miss, but I will be using his Forza Horizon 5 data because he does claim that he is using the built-in benchmark, so I should be able to match his results run for run, but I'm not going to be able to use any of his other performance metrics because we just don't know where he's capturing the data. As for Gamers Nexus, as a media outlet that prides itself in its test methodologies, one glaring fact that they didn't share with their video is just where they were collecting their data. With these lower powered processors and these types of games, FPS can vary drastically depend on where you are in the game, what kind of action's going on in the scene, so I really can't trust or validate any of their data. So to me, this data is kind of useless, and I really hope that their February 25th review of the Steam Deck provides a little bit more clarity in order to get a little bit of extra confidence in their data. With that all out of the way, guys, it's time to talk performance. Now let's set a bit of a baseline and start doing some synthetic benchmarks. Now the Fox did an excellent job by providing us with Unigen Superposition, Unigen Valley, as well as Unigen Heaven, but unfortunately these benchmarks just aren't as relevant this day and age in favor of tools like 3D Mark's TimeSpy, Firestrike Extreme, and other types of Windows-based tools. But that's the problem. All of these tests are being done in Linux, so really the only multi-platform video-based benchmark is going to be the Unigen suite. So I can only work with what I've got access to, so let's start it off with Unigen Heaven. Heaven starts us off with my Hackendeck running 12.5% slower than the Steam Deck. The RX 560 though, it does best the deck by 4%, which does confirm some of the Redditors' anticipated performance over on the subreddit. This could be a good Steam Deck analog. And yes, of course, the GTX 1050 is 35% faster. Now you'll also notice some new contenders to the ring. That's my Hackendeck running with an additional 200 MHz on the iGPU, which is still below the standard 5700G's clock speed. And for grins, I was wondering what the 5700G looked just stock out of the box in all these benchmarks. In Unigen Valley, my Hackendeck is 1% faster than the Steam Deck, and with that additional 200 MHz, it bumps it up 8% faster than the Steam Deck. And well, isn't this interesting? The RX 560 is 25% faster than the deck. And continuing on, the GTX 1050 is 54% faster. Now, superposition is a much more relevant workload this day and age because it is just very heavy in how it renders its graphics. And as you'll see with the results here, each of these lower end graphics cards is within 3 frames of the Steam Deck. Now, my original configuration for the Hackendeck is behind by 3 FPS, or roughly 14%, but if I bump up the graphics clock just a bit, I do manage to get within 1 frame. And the RX 560, it does match the same effective frame rate as the Steam Deck. And of course, the GTX 1050 is far ahead. So overall, averaging all the frame rates for these different benchmarks, it looks like my Hackendeck is only behind by 3 FPS, which manages right at 7%. The additional 200 MHz on my deck gets us within a single frame, or 2%. The RX 560 does get a bit of a buffer when it comes to performance, and it beats the deck by 10%, or 4 frames. And guys, you're going to hear this a lot in this video, the GTX 1050 sits comfortably ahead by 44%. Now, given the results from all of these different synthetic benchmarks, I think all of the stuff we've been talking to this point is starting to make a lot of sense. Now, I know synthetics don't necessarily represent real-time gameplay, so let's see how that translates into a handful of the games. I'm going to be starting off with Forza Horizon 5 because I have multiple sources to reference as well as multiple samples from the Fox's latest video to compare against. All of my testing is going to be at 800p and I'll be covering very low, low, high, and ultra detail settings. Why these reviewers didn't test the medium detail setting? It beats me, but I'm going to work with what I've got. With the very low detail setting, it is interesting to see the Steam Deck running considerably slower than the rest of these graphic solutions. It does appear that we are either hitting a CPU or a power limit threshold that is just preventing the deck from performing as well as it should. My Hackendeck is 27% faster, and from there, there's about an 11 FPS window going across the field. Now, with the low detail settings, it does appear to be a bit more reliable, and my Hackendeck solution slides by 3 FPS or 5%. The RX 560 is also lagging behind by just a bit, but only at 3%. But that GTX 1050 does pull ahead by 18%. One thing to keep in mind is that by adjusting the Hackendeck's iGPU clock speed, I can account for some of the performance improvements by the LPDDR5 memory interface that I'm just not able to replicate with my current set of hardware. High detail settings continue to impress with the Hackendeck averaging 40 FPS, which might be on the border of being playable for this game. My simulated Steam Deck suffers a 6 FPS defeat, lagging behind by 15%, but the RX 560 fares much better with a 1 FPS reduction. Though the GTX 1050 is only ahead by 5 FPS, that does translate into a 13% improvement. Now I'm going to go ahead and include the Ultra preset here, mainly because the data is available, and the Steam Deck does tend to shine here and it comes out on top of all the GPUs. However, with my current setup, this setting just isn't playable in any of the instances, and for whatever reason, each of my Hackendeck configs encounter a kernel-level driver crash, preventing me from getting that data. Now, hopefully, this sort of issue doesn't trickle down into the Steam Deck release as it comes out later this month. Alright, next up is Ghostrunner, and this game is incredibly difficult to benchmark. For one, I've never played this game before. 2, I'm just terrible at gaming on it on a controller. And 3, there just isn't a built-in benchmark. So depending on where we are in the game, our frame rates are going to be varying drastically. Now, I'm going to be using the Fox's settings, which is a mix of the high and I think 1 low detail settings, and I'm going to be taking my frame rate from a single stretch of runs within his video loop. Now, I know this is not an ideal place to make a comparison, but given the fluidity of the game and the lack of just overall statistics for FPS to this point, this is the best that I've got. By doing so, I'm having to capture the footage for each of these segments and recording the frame rate numbers to get an average value for both my setup and the Fox's gameplay. For whatever reason, Mango HUD is able to start capturing data, but stopping the data logging, it just crashes the game. Now, my Hackendeck is 5 FPS or 7% slower than the deck, but the 200 MHz boost gets it within 1%. And going all the way to the 5700G's default clock speed, the Hackendeck is now 4% faster. Now, in an interesting twist, the RX 560 is 16% faster in this exact same spot. And guys, you know what I'm going to say, the GTX 1050 screams ahead by 58%. Regardless, when gaming on my setup, it's as fluid of an experience than what we saw in the Fox's video, and I am still within that 10% performance window that I claimed in my previous video. Now, the final video I'm testing today is Control, and we have talked about this game several times here on the channel, and it was highlighted in the Reset Era leaks. Well, they reported 800p at low detail settings hitting at just below 60 FPS. Granted, we have no idea where they actually tested to get that number, but it at least gets us a stake in the ground on where to go. So I'm going to be relying on the Fox's live footage and on-boot performance reports in order to come up to my value. My Hackendeck misses its target by 6 FPS, lagging behind by 11%. An additional 200 MHz buys me an additional 3 frames, landing 5% slower than the deck. And the stock iGPU speeds at the 5700G match the Steam Deck's performance. The RX 560 actually jumps ahead to 71 FPS, which is an unexpected 25% improvement, and the GTX 1050 is ahead by a whopping 37%. So overall, I'm really curious to see how the Hallway of Doom performs, and in case anyone is curious, I reported right at 55 FPS with this setup, which is arguably one of the most stressful corridors in the game. So taking a look at all of these gameplay results, let's sum it all up. I'm going to be using the low detail setting from Forza Horizon, as that seems to be the most playable setting with the Steam Deck hardware. On average, my Hackendeck is 8% slower than the Steam Deck, or a modest 5 FPS. The RX 560, though being 10% faster in Unigen, is now 13% faster in gameplay. dedicated GPUs clearly have an advantage over the well-balanced Steam Deck. And as no surprise to me, the GTX 1050 is 25 FPS faster than the deck, resulting in 40% more performance. Alright, with all of the performance out of the way, I've got several different conclusions I want to talk about. Now, first and most obvious is the GTX 1050. It should be blatantly obvious, but the GTX 1050 is faster than the Steam Deck. In my previous video, I claimed it would be 33% faster, and now it's in fact 40% faster in these titles and in these scenarios. Harkening back to my original GTX 1050 video and the amount of flack that I caught with it, I still stand by all the data I reported and all the conclusions up to this point. Now, the original intent of that video is to help temper down some of the expectations when it comes to performance on the deck, and judging by the general attitude over at the subreddit these days, I think that the majority of people kind of come to this same conclusion. Now, taking a look at the RX 560, I've had a bunch of conversations privately with some of you guys, and it kind of makes sense where you guys come up with that specific recommendation. And heck, it makes a whole bunch more sense than the GTX 1050. However, synthetic results don't always translate into gameplay, so there could be some differences going on under the surface that improve the performance of the RX 560 in this way. And extrapolating back just a bit, the RX 460, at least on paper, appears to be between 4 and 10% slower than the 560. So that does seem to be a reasonable analog to the Steam Deck. And lastly, the most important conclusion is talking about my Hackendeck. Now, going back to that community poll, it looks like just under half of you guys were right on the money with my performance predictions. And as much as I wanted to get it within that 5% margin window, the cards just didn't line up when it comes to the hardware as well as the software performance with my setup. On the bright side though, I would rather be a little bit conservative in my estimates rather than being overly optimistic. And another way to say that is I would much rather tell you guys we are going to be 6 FPS slower instead of being 12% faster. And the prime example here is with God of War. In my latest short that got a lot of traction with you guys, I reported and suggested that you guys should run at 800p in the original quality settings, but engaging FSR into quality mode. I thought the gameplay looked really good, and we were able to manage a locked 30 FPS in the intro settings of the game. Now, if you turn off FSR, we do in fact get right between 25 and 26 in certain spots, so I thought adding the FSR was a great solution to shore up our frame rate. But had I reported we were getting 36, 38 FPS, you guys would have engaged original detail settings and were like, geez, what's going on here? I'm getting 1% lows that are out of whack. And that might have made some of you guys a little disappointed with just how well the Steam Deck was going to perform. So I thought in my videos, I've given us a little bit of room to work with in order to optimize our experience. Now, I know a bunch of you guys are just listening to me talk about this and you're just thinking, Turk, this is just a whole bunch of excuses. So I guess it is what it is. I've been basing my Hackendeck's performance off of 4 to 5 month old performance leaks, and if y'all are familiar with product development, a whole bunch of stuff has changed since then. Now, I don't even think you're able to download Manjaro with the older levels of kernels. I don't even think you can download the 5.14 kernel. As for graphics drivers, I'm now on Mesa 21, and other than that, there's been all sorts of improvements that aren't even available to the mainstream public yet that the Steam Deck is currently developing and delivering at this point. So I'm not going to be able to get an exact one-to-one in a software solution, and there could be that secret sauce in there that I mentioned in my performance video. But now that we do have a bit more concrete data, I think it's safe to say that by adding an additional 200 MHz onto my Steam Deck, I get really close to the Steam Deck's actual performance, and it helps to mitigate some of that memory bandwidth that we're lacking from the LPDDR5 versus DDR4 4400. But I do want to mention one thing, guys. As we saw in the AMD CES keynote when they were talking about their Rembrandt APUs, the major improvement going from their Vega-based APUs all the way to the RDNA 2 APUs is mainly the improvements when it comes to efficiency. This 5700G is rated at a TDP of 65 watts. The Steam Deck's APU is 15 watts. Overall, that is a drastic reduction in power consumption, And that lines up with some of the performance prediction models we've come up on this channel. At the end of the day, guys, I do have to say that my Hackendeck is in fact slower than the Steam Deck. But as we go through all these different videos and we start to iterate on the learning that we've got, I think that my Hackendeck is now in a good place of being a really good analog when it comes to predicting the performance of the Steam Deck. Now, I presented data to defend my case, and I presented data to refute some of the criticism and the flack that I've been getting up to this point. And to be honest, that's all I can really do here on this channel. So it's up to you guys, the Turk Force, to share this video and this channel with your friends and start talking about some of the stuff we've been able to achieve over these past 6 months. Now, this isn't the end for our little Hackendeck. There's plenty more coming up in the horizon. Now that we've got the official release coming in within a week or so, I'm going to be able to do a more thorough analysis and start to do some more, game optimization guides. But there's one thing that I think that is lacking in this community, and that's just a general Linux preparation course. And I would love to show you guys some of the ins and outs when it comes to Linux, from downloading packages, compiling code, as well as tweaking some of the underlying features from using the Hackendeck in order to optimize y'all's gaming experience with the shiny new handheld. And that's going to be my video, guys. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've liked what you've seen up to this point, do all those good YouTube things. Like, share, comment, talk about it over on the Discord. Definitely check out the Steam Deck Discord because I'm there all the time. And if you're wanting to talk with me directly, you can always reach out by DM over on Twitter. But that's going to be it, guys. I hope you've had a good time. I'll catch you in the next one, Turk Force.